At the height of his power, J. Paul Getty could buy almost anything on earth. His oil empire spanned continents, his art collection rivaled museums, and his Tudor estate boasted 72 rooms filled with priceless treasures. Yet he installed a payphone for guests in his mansion, refusing to pay for their calls. This paradox, astronomical wealth paired with pathological frugality, would define not just Getty's life, but the tragic dynasty he created. While he meticulously accumulated the largest private fortune in history, his family unraveled. Sons succumbed to substance abuse and despair, a grandson lost his ear to kidnappers, and the Getty name became synonymous with gilded misery. Thus, in today's episode, we'll take you through the full story of how the world's wealthiest man built an empire that made him a king, but left him dying alone in a castle full of treasures he could never truly enjoy, as we recount the Getty family curse, how America's oil fortune became Hollywood tragedy. In 1957, J. Paul Getty opened Fortune magazine to find himself crowned the richest man in America. The irony wasn't lost on him. He read this news from his Tudor estate in England, where he'd chosen to live as a virtual exile from the country that had made him wealthy. The massive estate, Sutton Place, built in the 1530s, stood as a testament to both his wealth and his increasing isolation from American society. Getty had built his fortune through a combination of ruthless business acumen and extraordinary timing. During the Depression, when others were selling, he was buying, snapping up oil companies at bargain prices. His father had laid the foundation in the Oklahoma oil fields, but Paul transformed that modest success into an empire that spanned continents. Unlike his contemporaries who inherited vast fortunes, Getty started in the oil fields, learning the business from the ground up. His father, George Getty, had initially resisted Paul's vision for expansion, preferring to keep their operation modest and manageable. But Paul saw something bigger, a future where oil would power not just automobiles, but the entire modern world. Getty's first major triumph came in 1916, when he struck oil in Oklahoma's Tulsa County, turning a $500 investment into his first million at age 24. This early success shaped his business philosophy, careful investment combined with bold action when opportunity arose. He meticulously studied geological reports and industry trends, building his expertise in the oil business from the ground up. His personal life, however, proved more challenging than his business ventures. Married and divorced 5 times, father to 5 sons by 4 different women, Getty increasingly focused on his business dealings and art collecting. His first marriage to Jeanette Demont lasted from 1923 to 1926, setting a pattern of personal relationships that would be repeated throughout his life. The contrast between his business success and personal struggles became increasingly apparent as his wealth grew. While Getty Oil expanded across the globe, securing lucrative rights in Saudi Arabia that would multiply his fortune many times over, his family relationships became increasingly complex. He maintained contact with his children primarily through letters and phone calls from his English estate. From Sutton Place, Getty managed his empire with careful attention to costs that sometimes bordered on frugality. The famous payphone he installed for guests became a symbol of his complex relationship with wealth, a billionaire who believed strongly in watching every dollar. Yet this same man built one of the world's greatest private art collections, though always with an eye for value and investment potential. His art collection represented more than just an assemblage of beautiful objects. It was a legacy he hoped would endure. Each carefully chosen piece reflected both his taste and his business acumen, as he often managed to acquire masterpieces at surprisingly reasonable prices through clever negotiation and timing. But as the 1960s dawned, Getty's empire stood at its apex. His wealth had grown to unprecedented levels, making him the richest private citizen in the world. None could have predicted the dark shadow that would soon engulf his family, turning their vast wealth into a curse that would echo through generations. The price of creating such an empire would be paid not by its architect, but by those who inherited its burden. The story of the Getty sons unfolded against the backdrop of America's post-war boom, when their father's wealth had reached heights that seemed almost mythological. But money, as each would discover, offered no protection against personal demons, and sometimes seemed to attract them instead. George F. Getty II, the eldest son, bore the heaviest expectations. Born in 1924 to J. Paul Getty's first wife, Jeanette Demont, George entered a world already shaped by the weight of the Getty name. Intelligent and hard-working, he served in World War II before joining Getty Oil. Unlike his father's other sons, George embraced the oil business, displaying an aptitude that suggested he might one day take over the empire. The relationship between father and son was complex. J. Paul Getty respected George's business acumen, but maintained the same exacting standards he applied to everyone in his organization. Their correspondence revealed a formal relationship filled with discussions of business matters but little personal warmth. George worked diligently to prove himself worthy of the Getty name, taking on increasing responsibilities within the company. Eugene Paul Getty, later known as John Paul Getty Jr., chose a dramatically different path. Born in 1932 to J. Paul Getty's third wife, Adolphine Helmley, Eugene Paul initially worked for the family business, managing Getty Oil's Italian operations. However, by the 1960s, he had embraced the counterculture movement that was sweeping Europe. Eugene Paul's second marriage to Talitha Pohl in 1966 marked his complete break from the corporate world his father inhabited. Talitha, a model and actress of Dutch extraction, became an icon of 1960s style. Their palazzo in Rome became a gathering place for artists, musicians, and European nobility. The couple embodied a new kind of aristocracy, one that merged old money with bohemian sensibilities. J. Ronald Getty, born in Berlin on the 19th of December 1929, to J. Paul Getty and his fifth wife, Anne Rourke, maintained a lower profile than his brothers. He chose to forge his own path outside the family business, though he remained involved in family matters, particularly during the later crises that would engulf the Getty name. Gordon Peter Getty, born on the 20th of December 1933, also to J. Paul Getty and Anne Rourke, would eventually emerge as perhaps the most successful of the brothers in handling the family wealth. Combining his father's business sense with artistic sensibilities, Gordon studied music while maintaining his business interests. This unusual combination of talents would later serve him well as a trustee of the Getty fortune. But it was the trajectory of George Getty II that would first signal the dark turn in the family's story. Despite his apparent success in business, George struggled with personal demons. In 1951, he married Gloria Gordon, and they had a son together. But by the early 1970s, he was facing mounting pressures both personal and professional. The end came tragically on the 6th of June 1973, when George died in his Los Angeles home at age 48. Following a fight with his wife, he had locked himself in his bedroom, consumed a combination of alcohol and pills, and suffered a devastating injury with a barbecue fork. After delayed medical attention, he slipped into a coma and died, leaving behind questions that would never be fully answered. The death of George Getty II marked a turning point in the family narrative. Within months, another tragedy would strike, one that would capture international headlines and forever change how the world viewed the Getty name. The kidnapping of J. Paul Getty III, Eugene Paul's teenage son, would transform the family's private struggles into public spectacle, revealing the dark side of inheriting one of the world's greatest fortunes. On the 10th of July 1973, in Rome's Piazza Farnese, John Paul Getty III, the 16-year-old son of Eugene Paul Getty, vanished. The teenager, known for his bohemian lifestyle and long red hair, had been living semi-independently in Rome, frequenting the city's nightclubs and art scenes while his father battled drug addiction in England. Initially, when the kidnapping was reported, few took it seriously. The young Getty had previously joked about staging his own kidnapping to extract money from his notoriously frugal grandfather. Even the Italian police were skeptical, suggesting it might be a hoax orchestrated by a teenager seeking attention or funds. This skepticism would prove to be a devastating miscalculation. 2 days after the disappearance, his mother, Gail Harris, received a ransom demand. "We have kidnapped Paul Getty's grandson," it stated. The kidnappers demanded $17 million for his safe return. What followed would become one of the most notorious kidnapping cases in history, exposing the dark paradox at the heart of the Getty fortune. J. Paul Getty's response from Sutton Place shocked the world. "I have 14 grandchildren," he declared, "and if I pay 1 penny of ransom, I'll have 14 kidnapped grandchildren." Behind this seemingly callous response lay his conviction that paying ransoms only encouraged more kidnappings. He also harbored doubts about the authenticity of the kidnapping, suspecting his grandson's involvement in staging it. The situation created an impossible bind for the boy's parents. His father, Eugene Paul Getty, was still struggling with drug addiction in London and had no access to the kind of money the kidnappers demanded. His mother, Gail Harris, had received virtually no settlement after her divorce from Eugene Paul and was essentially penniless, despite the family name. The Getty fortune, worth billions, sat tantalizingly out of reach while a teenager's life hung in the balance. As weeks turned into months, the kidnappers grew increasingly frustrated. Their ransom demands were met with silence or negotiations for lower amounts. The boy was held in the mountains of Calabria under harsh conditions, moved frequently between hiding places to avoid detection. His captors, later identified as members of the 'Ndrangheta crime syndicate, began to lose patience. Then, in November 1973, an envelope arrived at the offices of Il Messaggero newspaper. Inside was a lock of red hair and a human ear, along with a threat. Reduce the ransom to $3 million, or the next package would contain something worse. Accompanying the gruesome delivery was a letter from the young Getty. "This is Paul's ear. If we don't get some money within 10 days, then the other ear will arrive. In other words, he will arrive in little bits." This grotesque turn finally spurred action. J. Paul Getty agreed to contribute $2.2 million toward the ransom, while John Paul Getty Jr. covered the remainder. After painstaking negotiations, the final ransom was set at $2.8 million. On the 15th of December 1973, 5 months after his abduction, John Paul III was found at an abandoned gas station between Rome and Naples. The physical ordeal was over, but the psychological damage had only begun. The young Getty called his grandfather to thank him for securing his release, but J. Paul Getty refused to come to the phone. This final rejection would haunt the teenager as he struggled to rebuild his life in the aftermath of the kidnapping. The case exposed the paradoxes of vast wealth, a family with billions at their disposal, yet paralyzed by distrust, dysfunction, and the complex dynamics of inherited fortune. The kidnapping of John Paul Getty III would become more than just a sensational crime story. It would serve as a dark parable about wealth, family, and the price of being born into one of the world's most famous fortunes. In the years following the kidnapping, the dark shadow over the Getty family only deepened. The physical and psychological aftermath would shape not only John Paul Getty III's life, but the entire family's trajectory. In 1974, he married Gisela Martine Zacher, who was pregnant with their son, marking a new chapter in his life while still grappling with the trauma of his captivity. J. Paul Getty never saw his grandson after the kidnapping. From his Tudor estate in England, he continued to expand his business empire and art collection, seemingly detached from the family turmoil that surrounded his name. When he died on the 6th of June 1976 at age 83, his net worth stood at $2 billion. His will reflected both his passion for art and his complex relationship with his family. The bulk of his fortune went to the J. Paul Getty Museum Trust. At the time of his death, Getty's oil empire was at its peak. Getty Oil stood as one of America's largest private companies, with interests spanning the globe. The Saudi Arabian concession he had secured in the 1940s had proven to be one of the most lucrative oil deals in history. Yet the patriarch's passing set in motion a series of events that would transform the family fortune. For young John Paul III, the years following the kidnapping were marked by struggle. In 1981, at age 25, a devastating combination of drugs, alcohol and Valium triggered a stroke that left him severely disabled, quadriplegic, nearly blind and unable to speak. His care would require round-the-clock attention for the rest of his life, with costs running into millions of dollars annually. The 1980s brought significant changes to the Getty fortune. In 1984, after years of complex negotiations, Texaco offered to acquire Getty Oil for $9.9 billion. Gordon Getty, as trustee of the family trust, played a crucial role in orchestrating the sale. While the deal generated tremendous wealth, it also marked the end of the Gettys' direct control over their primary source of wealth, the oil business that J. Paul Getty had built over decades. J. Paul Getty Jr., still battling his own demons in the wake of his son's tragedy, underwent a remarkable transformation. After the death of his beloved wife Talitha and his son's kidnapping, he gradually overcame his drug addiction and eventually became one of Britain's most generous philanthropists. In recognition of his charitable works, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, becoming Sir Paul Getty. The Getty Trust, meanwhile, grew to become one of the world's wealthiest art institutions. The family's legacy would increasingly be defined not by oil, but by art and philanthropy, as the institutions J. Paul Getty founded continued to expand and evolve. But wealth continued to extract its price from the family. Gordon Getty, who had seemed to navigate the family dynamics most successfully, faced his own public scandal in 1999 when it was revealed he had maintained a secret second family in Los Angeles for many years. The news highlighted once again the complex personal lives that seemed to characterize the Getty name. Each generation of Gettys seemed to face its own struggles with the burden of inheritance. The fortune that J. Paul Getty had built through decades of shrewd business decisions had transformed into something else entirely, a complex legacy of art, philanthropy, and family trauma that would continue to shape lives long after the oil wells had been sold. The Getty legacy continues to evolve, shaped by both triumph and tragedy. John Paul Getty III lived for 3 decades after his stroke, requiring constant care until his death in 2011 at age 54. His son, Balthazar Getty, would forge his own path, finding success as an actor in Hollywood, though even he could not entirely escape the weight of the family name. The institutions that bear the Getty name have flourished in ways that perhaps even J. Paul Getty could not have imagined. The Getty Trust, established through his will, has become one of the world's leading cultural and philanthropic organizations. The Getty Center in Los Angeles and the Getty Villa in Pacific Palisades stand as monuments to his vision of making art accessible to the public. Mark Getty, one of J. Paul Getty's grandchildren, demonstrated a different kind of business acumen from his grandfather when he co-founded Getty Images in 1995. This digital media company would become a dominant force in the stock photography and digital media landscape, showing that subsequent generations could build their own enterprises, even if in very different industries from oil. The family's story has captured public imagination in various ways. Books, documentaries, and films have attempted to unravel the complexities of the Getty saga. Most notably, Ridley Scott's 2017 film All the Money in the World dramatized the kidnapping of John Paul Getty III, while the FX series Trust offered a different perspective on the same events. Gordon Getty, now in his late 80s, has devoted much of his life to classical music composition, following his artistic passions while managing the family's business interests. His dual life as both businessman and artist perhaps best exemplifies the transformation of the Getty legacy from pure commerce to a blend of business and cultural pursuits. The Getty family story serves as a complex parable about the nature of inherited wealth in modern America. What began as a pure business empire built on oil and hard-nosed negotiation evolved into something more multifaceted, a source of both cultural enrichment through the Getty Trust's institutions and a cautionary tale about the burdens of inherited wealth. Today, the youngest generations of Gettys continue to make their own mark on the family legacy. Nats Getty, a descendant of J. Paul Getty and child of Ariadne Getty, has emerged as a prominent LGBTQ+ advocate and fashion designer. This represents yet another way the Getty family story has evolved, reflecting changing social values far removed from the conservative oil industry that built their family's fortune. The Getty name remains synonymous with wealth, but its meaning has shifted. What was once primarily associated with oil and industry is now equally connected to art, culture, and philanthropy. The transformation reflects broader changes in American society, from the industrial age that J. Paul Getty dominated to the digital era his descendants now navigate. And now, we'd love to see you in the comments. What is your opinion on the Getty legacy? Are they a tragic case of wealth and woe, or can we not relate to them, since they are objectively raised with a silver spoon? Let us know what you think, and with that said, thanks for your viewership with us here at Old Money Luxury, and cheers until next time.